Uh, Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. And Erica, you'll have to unmute yourself. And then,
Okay.
so, yeah.
Uh,
Erica, unmute yourself.
There we go.
Eric. Oh, gotcha. Okay,
Thanks.
good. Yep.
Welcome, everyone, to our last meeting, our last lecture on the women of surrealism. I'm going to talk for about 75 minutes. So we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to talk about all of those questions that I asked on the um, uh, email that was sent to you 3 or 4 times now, I think. Okay, so our final two artists to discuss seem in temperament to be total opposites. On the one hand, a gloomy yet uninhibited Swiss, on the other, a seemingly optimistic Midwestern American. But on closer inspection, Meret Oppenheim and Dorothea Tanning shared several characteristics in common with all the other women associated with Surrealist art. They all rebelled against family and societal expectations. They bristled at being pigeonholed as a woman artist. They were inspired by surrealist imagery, but in most cases, they ultimately moved in aesthetic directions that were their own and also wrote poetry or wrote books. They found in their creativity a way to express their innermost feelings. And in many cases, these revealed dark aspects of female sexuality or uncovered subconscious dream worlds. And yes, in the case of Meret Oppenheim and Dorothea Tanning and so many others, they were both romantically involved with Max Ernst. In Tanning's case, she became his last wife and was with him for 30 plus years until he died. I want to start this with, this is a picture of Tanning while she's painting one of her most intriguing and somewhat shocking picture, Maternity. And this is Meret Oppenheim late in life in 1975 with one of her sculptures in Bern. I want to start with the single work that most people know by Meret Oppenheim, and that is The Fur Cup, or as it's actually titled, Object, from 1936. This is definitely the most famous surrealist object, anointed as such by its appearance at the groundbreaking MoMA exhibition, the 1936 Fantastic Art, Dada, and Surrealism. Anyone who's taught an art history course that even briefly mentions surrealism will talk about this singular piece. And I can remember teaching classes where I included this object and would immediately say that I was sure that it had to have been created by a woman. Why? Well, we'll talk about this in a few minutes and discuss the ramifications of its enormous fame for the artist. And like most art historians and those who loved surrealism, I too knew of Oppenheim only through this piece, as if she produced nothing else. So we're going to look at some of the other work that she did do. Meret Oppenheim was born in Berlin, but her mother was Swiss, and the family ended up living in Basel, Switzerland. Her father was a doctor interested in Jungian psychology, whose writings he shared with the very young Meret. Her mother's Swiss family, the Wengers, were the inventors of the Swiss Army knife. Can you believe that? So, once again, this artist had the privilege to be so audaciously independent and determined to be an artist removed from bourgeois expectations of a woman's place. Realizing that Meret was not cut out for conventional schooling, her father allowed her to quit school at 16 and move with a girlfriend to Paris, where ostensibly she was to study at one of the many art academies. But really, she just hung out at all the cafes and wrote poetry And there she eventually met the avant-garde artists she had known about. This is a photo of her by Man Ray, who became her lover and who created some of his most memorable photographs of her. And the other is the mature Meret, the mature Oppenheim, shortly before she died in 1985. Those tattoos on her face are superimposed. Her earliest works are somewhat macabre and distressing. I would think of them as if they were like a goth teen's work today, with this strangling angel and a somewhat darkly humorous scene of suicide. She was introduced to the Surrealist circles by the Swiss artist Alberto Giacometti and our old Dada friend Hans Arp, or Jean Arp. These much older men were captivated by her beauty and immediately anointed her as one of their femme enfant, their woman child. Man Ray considered her the most uninhibited woman he had ever met, and that's saying a lot coming from Man Ray. She was more than willing to pose for him in the nude, and as Chadwick writes, she, like Leonore Feeney, loved to shock an audience by undressing in the most inappropriate places. This photo on the right, the érotique voilée, or veiled erotic, with Oppenheim posed against Man Ray's friend's etching press, proved far too scandalous for even a surrealist publication. Its erotic doesn't seem very veiled at all. Ambiguous, perhaps, with its amusing placement of that phallic handle at just the right spot. While later, Oppenheim did admit to enjoying the spirit of rebellion that these photos displayed. She objected to the idea that they had anything to do with her subsequent artwork. Um, it's understandable that she would later lament that these photos made by a male surrealist were exhibited at exhibitions that were meant to be about her artwork. They do seem to substantiate the claim, as one critic wrote, that the surrealists' much touted revolution of the mind was mapped on the female body. Its metaphors were erotic, its attitudes misogynistic. In any case, the very young Oppenheim, so she was like 18 at this point, was now absorbed into surrealist circles. And you can see her here in the white blouse at a garden party, which includes, this is Sophie Teuber Arp. There's Max Ernst with his young convent girl wife. This is Jean Arp. And surprisingly to me, I didn't think of him as being part of the Surrealist circle. This is James Joyce over here. And it was about this time that in 1934 that Oppenheim began a passionate one-year affair with, of course, Max Ernst. She made some of her best early works during this period, such as these two abstract works that show the influence of that other sometimes member of the surrealist mob, Joan Miró. There's always a little bit of humor and playfulness in Miró's works. I love this piece, The Dog Barking at the Moon, which is very early. This is 1926. And I think that Oppenheim has included some of that humor in this one that says, is titled Little Ghost Eating Bread. So she was working on this kind of art when she was with Max Ernst. And this one, quick, quick, the most beautiful vowel is voiding, or husch, husch, der schönste Vokal entleert sich, is meant to be a portrait of Ernst At the bottom, she has written ME for MO or by MO, and she depicts him, we think, as this is a ball and chain attached to a bar above which six colored forms are floating freely. And the ball, rather than a heavy solid, is a collection of painterly brushstrokes that seem to be in the process of disintegration. This is perhaps her farewell statement to Ernst when she broke off the affair. And the other image, an object titled Ma Gouvernante, my nurse, mein Kindermädchen, also from 1936, was actually made after the fur cup, but its associations with Ernst compelled me to include it here. Here she's combining kind of culinary and sexual ideas with a pair of shoes that had actually belonged to Max Ernst's wife, Marie Berthe Orange, and she's bound them together like a trussed fowl, like a trussed turkey, and put those little paper things at the end, those paper frills, as if these are a game bird ready to be devoured. Mary Ann Caws, who's a well-known writer about surrealism, calls it a work creepy beyond belief, and she meant that in the best possible way. She says that Oppenheim is so in-your-face an artist that she is sometimes hard to look at. Now, when Ernst's young wife noticed that the shoes were hers, that Ernst had given them to her, she removed them from the piece and so destroyed the work, only to have Oppenheim make it again with another pair of white shoes. Um, she said, Oppenheim said that it was meant to evoke images of women, images of domesticity, images of bondage and restraint, limits on freedom. But it's also something that it has a bit of wit about it and makes you laugh. She also said that the white shoes brought back memories of a childhood nanny who didn't like her. She also thought that it evoked the association of thighs being squeezed together. So that statement confirms that Oppenheim associates the shoes with some kind of shoes as a fetish of some sort. One wouldn't have to be a Freudian to say that in this context, they are fetishistic substitutes for female thighs, evoked by the tan bottoms of the shoes. This brings us now to the object, to fur cup, or as Breton labeled it, le déjeuner en fourrure, luncheon in fur, which is a clever synthesis of Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe, the famous painting, Luncheon in the Grass, and Leopold von Sacher-Masoch's novel, Venus in Furs. Sacher-Masoch is, of course, the one after which masochism is named. So here's the best known version of how this piece came about, which may or may not be entirely true. One day in 1936, Oppenheim met her friends Pablo Picasso and his new lover Dora Maar at the Café de Flore, a Paris coffee house that was a regular haunt of all these artists. By this time, Oppenheim was barely getting by trying to sell her art. So she was making a modest income by designing jewelry and accessories for the trailblazing fashion designer Elsa Schiaparelli, who Dolores talked about last time. She was known for her shoe-shaped hats and telephone-shaped purses. And Meret had, at this point, just ended her affair with Max Ernst. The story goes that on seeing this bracelet that Meret was wearing, he commented that that anything could be covered with fur, that even this plate and this cup here And Oppenheim then said, well, yeah, when she found that her tea was cooling, she jokingly asked the waiter for a little more fur to swaddle her cup. So they were playing with puns and just commenting on this. And so intrigued, a little while after this, Oppenheim went to a department store and bought a cheap cup and saucer and spoon. In her studio, she artfully wrapped the items in such a way that the tan formed a dark border around the teacup's outer rim to match the saucer, while the body of the cup itself was offset in creamy white. There's arguments about what kind of fur this is. I think it's some kind of, I can't remember now. On seeing the work, Andre Breton, remember our Pope of Surrealism, was enchanted and exhibited it that year at the first Surrealist exhibition dedicated to objects. As the talking point of the show, the sculpture became the receptacle of all kinds of theories, fears, and longings. And this being the age of Freud, a gastrosexual interpretation was inescapable. The spoon was phallic, the cup vaginal, the hair pubic. For some, the tongue-shaped spoon brought to mind unpleasant sensations of a furry tongue. Others experienced unease at seeing a graceful item of the tea table transformed into something decadent and animalistic. Um, Others thought that it was just the fur was just too repulsive to be connected in an incongruous way with another kind of object, which is, of course, the aim of surrealism is to take objects and images and create them in incongruous ways that creates an unsettled attitude. Um, so among those that were impressed by this piece was Alfred Barr, the young director of New York's newly established Museum of Modern Art. When Oppenheim, always short on cash, expressed a willingness to sell the work for 1,000 French francs, Barr offered her roughly half that amount, so $50 essentially, and she agreed. Since this was the first work by a woman the museum acquired, Oppenheim is playfully called the First Lady of MoMA. It appeared at the groundbreaking MoMA exhibition, Fantastic Art, Dada, Surrealism, which had such a profound effect on so many artists, as we'll see in a minute with Dorothea Tanning. The board of the museum, however, those who were much more conservative than Barr, refused to show the piece after this 1936 show, except by private appointment, which tells you how evocatively erotic it seemed to straight-laced Americans. It wasn't shown again until the museum's Art of the Assemblage show in 1961. Oop, there we go. And you can't see it in this picture, but it's there. And this is the show in 1961. And this is the opening room of the entrance to, this is before the famous MoMA building was built. For Oppenheim, the unexpected success had mixed results. The fur cup became, as her niece said, her prison. The next year, having run out of funds, $50 didn't last very long, and with the Nazis on the rise, Oppenheim went back to Switzerland. And now we get into the problem of intentional fallacy. Let me go back to this again. She was dismayed at all the attention and all the interpretations given to this single object. She was thinking of it in a very offhanded way, or at least that's what she says. And she was really not ready for all of these responses. It still remains the single most important non-painterly artwork associated with surrealism. But her relatives, Oppenheim's relatives, later said that she felt trapped in the fame the work brought her. Remember, she's still very young. She just wasn't ready for this. And she began to lose faith in herself. I felt as if, she wrote, millennia of discrimination against women were resting on my shoulders, as if embodied in my feelings of inferiority. So she was having a real crisis of just what her art was meant to be about or what direction to take. Um, so this was the start of a 17-year-long depression. She had always been prone to bouts of anxiety and melancholy. And in the year before she created her fur cup, she had been sent by her father to consult with Carl Jung himself. His assessment, as he wrote to her father, was that Oppenheim reflected, quote, the youthful disorientation of our era and did not appear to have any neurotic complication. In 1937, as the problems with Nazism were becoming very apparent, she started moving back and forth between Paris and Basel, continuing until the beginning of the war to make a few paintings and other art objects. This is her Stone Woman, which she created in 1938. It seems that the water here is transforming this anthropomorphic pile of stones into a flesh and blood woman. The painting is certainly consistent with surrealist ideas about instability and metamorphosis, and it was apparently inspired by Man Ray's photographs of stones that she would have known before. Who knows? Of course, they also, both of these artists and most of the artists I know, hate the word influence. They don't want to necessarily own up to being influenced by anything. Oppenheim told an interviewer that this picture was a picture of contraries, sleeping stone and living waters. She referred to the stone as, quote, my inability to do any work. The feet, she said, were the only really positive thing because they represent a connection to the unconscious. And in 1943, when she had now settled in Basel full time, because the war is on by this time, she creates this Daphne and Apollo painting. Her story is not about Apollo's frustrated suffering. As we remember, Daphne and Apollo are the ones where he's chasing after her, and her father turns Daphne into a tree rather than have Apollo rape her, I guess. In this case, though, they both appear to be evolving into some kind of creature out of vegetables. So in standard depictions, Apollo is a physically unchanging male god, but in Oppenheim's painting, Apollo is transformed or transitioning just as much more even than Daphne. One writer compared him to looking like a potato at this point. So she's interested in metamorphosis in nature, but always centered on this kind of androgyny. In 1939, she worked with a group of furniture makers for an exhibition of avant-garde furniture in Paris. So this is 1939, gone back a few years, organized by René Drouin and Leo Castelli. Castelli, of course, is the dealer who comes to New York during the war and becomes the dealer of abstract expressionism. In this work, Oppenheim transformed a prosaic utility object, a table, into a fantasy supported by these bronze feet of a bird and marked with imprints of birds' feet on its oval surface, which you can't see in this picture very well. So she was always interested in working with functional things and also with objects of some sort. Later on, this table was manufactured in a limited edition of 30 copies. That was done in 1973. And if any of you saw that Antiques Roadshow bit, the table was still floating around. I think it's from this limited edition of 30 copies. As the war began, Oppenheim's depression and artistic uncertainties accelerated. She now remained in Basel and more or less gave up art. She wrote a play based on her grandmother's stories and did some prints. And in 1949, despite all of her rejection of the idea of marriage early in her life, she married a longtime boyfriend who was a motorcycle enthusiast. She first returned with him on the motorcycle to Paris in 1950, finding the old Surrealist group to have dispersed and to find Breton there still stuck in by now his fusty dogmas. Then suddenly, in 1954, she realized her crisis was over. She got a studio and started making art again. She went to a technical art school to learn how to paint properly, as she said, and how to construct objects. This really reinvigorated her career. While she did continue to make some paintings, her real interest in this period was for sculpted pieces. For example, this is Primal Venus, which straddles both the boundaries between figuration and abstraction. There's a little bit of straw at the top, which presumably represents fertility. She's always working in these rounded biomorphic forms, which can be a reference to erotic anatomy, such as this one, A Distant Relative from 1966. Again, she's trying to explore ideas of androgyny. There's a reference there both to breasts as well as testicles. And she said that this middle part could be underwear. And she's framed this with this old-fashioned gilded frame. By the 1970s, she seemed to start having fun with art again, such as this painting, Octopus's Garden, which of course refers to the Beatles song, shows her experimentation with different painterly techniques. And she even returned to fur as an artistic element in this playful work, Eichhörnchen, which is the German word for squirrel. I love that word, Eichhörnchen. It transforms the handle of a beer stein into a fluffy squirrel tail, engaging then with notions of masculinity, eroticism, and the macabre, while also displaying her trademark wit. By the late 60s and into the 70s, Oppenheim really came into her own. She produced as an artwork an X-ray of my skull, of which one critic writes, "These are works in which the artist seeks to make her existence unmistakably tangible." What can be more tangible of a singular person than their X-ray? She had her first retrospective at the Moderna Museet in Stockholm, and she began to be feted in her own country for work such as the sculpture Six Clouds on a Bridge. By the 1980s, she had received many honors from the Swiss government and was the subject of several films in Switzerland, where she became an increasingly prominent public persona. One writer notes she took this role very seriously, quote, although not with without a modicum of irony, unquote. While cognizant of feminist movements and supportive of them, she refused to be included in women-only art exhibitions, saying that creativity is androgynous. You may notice if you've read Chadwick's book that she talks about Oppenheim, but there are no images in the book of her work. That's because Oppenheim refused to allow them to be reproduced. She claimed that she would not be labeled as either a surrealist or a woman artist. Oppenheim inherited her family's house in Corona, this very nice 18th century building in the Italian section of Switzerland. I just wanted to include this to show these pretty fancy digs for someone who had been so bohemian in her early life. And there is one of her tables included in the house. I'm not sure whether this is now a museum or not. And her most well-known quotations sum up her life and struggles to be free and to be creative. Artists do the dreaming for society, and freedom is not something you are given, but something you have to take. So before we move on to Dorothea Tanning, does anybody have any questions or comments? No?
I have a question.
Yep.
So she left her family when she was quite young, 16, 17 years old, to go to France, and they let her go with a girlfriend. And she had affairs and
Yeah.
living quite the life. But it seems like they embraced her later. I don't know what their relationship was at the very beginning, but certainly supported her when she was having some crises. So that says a lot about their family.
Yeah. Well, he being a Jungian, her father
Oh,
was
yeah.
very supportive of all of this.
Mhm.
Yeah. Whether her lack of inhibitions came from that. Her mother was a little stricter, but she also came from this. Her mother's family was quite artistic, and her grandmother was a well-known children's writer in Switzerland. So it was, I would think, a fairly liberal, progressive house in that respect. Yeah. Rick, what do
Yeah,
you got?
so I tracked down the Antiques Roadshow, and it turns out that that table is now appraised in 2014 at $7,000.
Yeah, I
So
know.
it's not terribly expensive.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Uh,
there was even um, a later manufacture of a larger amount. Yeah, I was sort of surprised it was that little. Yeah, but at least we know now that there was more art. She did create more art than literally all of my teaching life. I knew only the fur cup. So it's good to know that, she made something, some other things as well. So. Anyone else? Okay,
Yes.
we've got,
Should I put,
yeah,
okay. I was just gonna say that, of all the artists we've looked at so far, I think, she was not centered in what I would consider an art center. I mean, a lot of them were around Mexico City, some were in Paris, some were in New York.
right.
She's often Bern.
Yeah,
So I'm not sure what the art scene was like there, but it seemed like
yeah,
she didn't have a whole lot of support for what she was doing.
yeah. Well, that's why she's so lionized in Switzerland.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, that the only other Swiss artist who really became well known in this modern thing is Paul Klee. And he's often not seen as Swiss, he's seen as German. But yeah, that's part of it. And she was she there's that other little video starts with her talking at the beginning. I think she was happy to stay in a smaller art world than going to Paris, back to Paris. But yeah, it's a question I think too of ambition and determination and all of that. And we'll see in Tanning a much different attitude to that. Okay, anyone else? I can't see you here. Let me see.
yeah, Sharon,
Yeah,
and
there there is a Paul Klee Museum in Bern, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, there
So
clay is everywhere in
yeah.
Switzerland. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
was he a contemporary of hers? He must have been.
Yes. Well, no, he dies in the 40s. So
Oh, okay.
she
She was
would have
young.
known of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she would have known of his work. Anyone
Zoom
else?
Zoom user. Yeah.
Hi, this is Sue. Um,
Uh-huh.
I had to leave for a few minutes. Did you bring up the nude woman feast where she's laying on the table? There's a woman laying on the table and they're eating off of her?
No, no.
No, oh, okay. I saw that regarding her, and I would think that would get a lot of play, but I guess it
Yeah.
didn't.
Well, as I said, if Man Ray considered her the most uninhibited woman he knew, that's saying a whole lot.
Okay.
With Kiki and the what's her name, the Countess de Noailles. It was a really lively bohemian scene in Paris at that time.
I
No, I
got to
didn't see
know.
that one.
It
Oh,
was
that
in a
was in the
it was in a
book. Yeah.
movie. It was in a little movie, and the people were outside watching. Then it was a feast for six. There was, I don't think it was her. It was just a woman laying down with
Oh,
her breasts and her vagina, everything there, and there was food all over her, and they were eating off of her.
it wasn't Oppenheim.
Oh, who was that? Because I saw that in one of the things you sent to us, one of the links. I thought it was her.
Oh, okay. No,
Was
I
it
can't
Darren?
remember.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I got that wrong. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Uh, Another Swiss artist would be Giacometti.
Oh, that's true. Yes, Giacometti. And an earlier one is Hodler. And those are the four that I know. Oh, and now there's Max Bill later. Yeah. But Switzerland is its own little entity. Yeah. So that's part of it. And then that Oppenheim had that period in which she just didn't do anything. Probably had a lot to do with it as well. But she was quite lionized and championed in Switzerland, and given all kinds of medals and awards and all of that kind of stuff. And then died fairly young, or younger than some of our other ones, especially younger than Dorothea Tanning, in the 1980s. So that's another reason, I guess. Yeah. Before women artists were really championed very strongly. So, anything else? Okay. Well, the quotations from Oppenheim lead easily into a discussion of our final artist, the only American painter among our women of surrealism, and that is Dorothea Tanning. And here's her statement when asked about the question of being a woman artist. Am I a surrealist? Am I a sophist, a Buddhist, a Zoroastrian? Am I an extremist, an alchemist, a contortionist, a mythologist, a fantasist, a humorist? And she goes on and on and on. I have no label except artist. And that she wrote in 1989. She too, like Oppenheim, refused to be labeled as a woman artist, although she was a little less militant about exclusion from female-centric exhibitions. She was very determined and ambitious, and essentially, as everyone writes, a happy person. And as we shall see, quite intriguingly, she had an attitude about feminism that I think had to do with the period in which she came of age. And as seems to me, after reading her very nice autobiography, Between Lives, the indisputable effect of living and working for 30 plus years alongside Max Ernst. Dorothea, who was called Dottie by her family, was born in the small little Midwestern town of Galesburg, Illinois, where she said there was nothing to do but sit on the Davenport and wait to grow up. And in another line, nothing happened but the wallpaper. She determined to be an artist from a very young age. And you see here her home studio that she built herself in 1926 when she's only 16. In her memoirs, Tanning recounted that both her parents were very loving, indulgent, and imaginative, the latter trait which she believed led to her creativity. But as another writer friend of hers has written, which I think is a perfect line to describe the problem of small town America, or small town anywhere, really, it was a life unsweetened by culture. So she nevertheless learned everything her parents had to teach her. So she learned to sew, she learned to cook, she did all of those things she was supposed to do. By her own admission, she was a small and delicate child prone to bouts of illness, which often confined her to bed. Like similar stories of young children who became well-known artists, it was this time during bed rest that she developed artistic skills and immersed herself into reading picture books. Her favorites were the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm and the stories and characters from Greek mythology and the Bible. It was from the likes of these that Dorothea gained an insight of the outside world, a world free from a cosseting mother. The public library, I'm a librarian on another side, so I'm a champion of libraries, was her escape from the mundane existence in this Midwestern town. And there she discovered all kinds of risque literature, tagged as such by the librarian as immoral. So, of course, those were the ones that the young Dottie devoured. She also set up her own little studio, a space that seemed suspicious to her family and friends, as if her wanting to be alone and to draw was some kind of malady. She would also amuse herself by the simple game that many of us have played, at staring at patterns on the wallpaper or furnishings and allowing her imagination to form images which were not real. In this way, she slipped from the real world into an imagined parallel existence. As a young woman, she worked in that library, and like all good girls, as she said, she went on to Knox College, but left after 2 years to go to Chicago and enroll in an art academy. She had actually packed a trunk back in Galesburg and now wrote to her broken-hearted family to send the trunk along. She left that art academy after 3 weeks, bored with its unimaginative training for commercial art. So artistically, we have to remember this, she was essentially self-taught. And here's a picture of her in Chicago next to the fried chicken for 35 cents sign. She stayed in Chicago for a while, but then itching for more experiences and more adventures, she first went to New Orleans, of all places, in 1935. So remember, the Depression's on at this time. Then she moved to New York City, determined to make her way as an artist. She began with jobs as a commercial artist, so she had taken up some of those lessons of illustration, and she made ads for Macy's and other department stores until she attended in 1936 that exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, Fantastic Art, Dada, and Surrealism. That same exhibition where Oppenheim's Fur Cup was exhibited. The exhibition had a profound effect on her, and she visited it again and again. These works revealed to Tanning, as she wrote, the limitless expanse of possibility. She now became Dorothea, no longer Dottie, and was certain that what she saw at the exhibition at MoMA was a turning point in her artistic life. This is the room of De Chirico, and he's the earlier proto-surrealist that we haven't really talked about. So this is at the show. And here I think I see a Miro and a Picasso. That's probably a Mont Cenis, I'm not sure. She wrote, "Here, gathered inside an innocent concrete building, are signposts so imperious, so laden, so seductive, and yes, so perverse that, like the insidious revelations of the Galesburg Public Library, they would possess me utterly." Still enraptured by what she had seen at the Fantastic Art Show, she recorded the names of all the artists exhibited there, and in the totally inauspicious year of 1939, she boarded a ship to Europe intent on meeting all these artists in Paris. And as she writes in her autobiography, naive and innocent that she was, the naive innocent that she was, she arrived in Paris in August of 1939, not realizing that no one is in Paris in August, and certainly not in this August when war was about to break out. When war broke out in September, after a harrowing escape via Germany to her family's relatives in Sweden, she finally returned to New York, disillusioned, but having learned that from her experiences crossing Germany at this time in a train, she wanted nothing to do with politics. But she was more determined than ever to be ready when, quote, these exotic human beings of surrealism would appear in New York. After the MoMA show, she began to incorporate dream elements into her paintings alongside her commercial work. She also developed a rich social life, meeting people like the composer John Cage and his friend, the dancer Merce Cunningham, who would remain lifelong friends. In 1941, she married a longtime boyfriend who was an academic writer who was also, unfortunately, an alcoholic, only to divorce him within 6 months. But upon the recommendation of her boss at Macy's, who admired her artwork, she was taken on as an artist by Julian Levy. Levy was one of the first gallery owners in New York to display surrealism. From the work she exhibited there before she knew the Parisian surrealists, and this is one of them, the Magic Flower Game, it's clear that she had already absorbed much of the surrealist style and attitude, this dreamlike subject matter with very enigmatic and cryptic connections between all of these objects. And in other examples before she met Max Ernst, are pieces that you can see she's really looked and absorbed this kind of idea of dreamlike, inconclusive, ambiguous pieces, including this portrait of Levy's wife at the time. But in 1942, these exotic beings did indeed arrive in New York, as we remember from the lecture about Leonora Carrington. And here is a photo of Peggy Guggenheim and Max Ernst. Remember, they're married at this time. And this is in her Art of this Century gallery. This is where she really was going to display all of the surrealists and built in this rather surrealist way. And this is the photo that we've seen before of all of those exiled artists as they came to New York in 1942. As Guggenheim later wrote, she was putting together an exhibition called 31 Women Artists. And as part of that project, she sent Max Ernst out to visit women artists, to collect works. And she had sent him to Dorothea Tanning's apartment. At the time, she wrote, she should have stopped at 30, since it was this visit that led to Ernst leaving her for Tanning. And this is the painting that was on Dorothea Tanning's easel when Ernst came to her apartment. This was what she was still producing at the time. And it's Ernst, according to Tanning, who gave the painting the title Birthday. They then played chess together, and within a week, Ernst had moved in with her. So this is quite a painting, really. Remember, so she's painted this before she's known Ernst. She portrays herself bare-breasted in a fantastical costume, in a 17th century style jacket that features these cascading Lilliputian figures whose limbs morph into the branches that are draped around her body. Her hand rests on the knob of a door that opens to reveal a never-ending series of other doors. Although her gaze calmly meets that of the viewer, her expression remains somewhat unreadable. She would later describe her process as creating a kind of web of dreams and ideas from which there was no escape. And she called enigma a very healthy thing because it encourages the viewer to look beyond the obvious and commonplace. And this little creature at the bottom is meant to be it looks like a lemur with wings. And the lemur is always portrayed in mythology as a nocturnal animal associated with night and spirits of the dead. She wrote of the doors that I had been struck one day by a fascinating array of doors, crowded together, soliciting my attention with their antic planes, light, shadows, imminent openings and shuttings. For there it was an easy leap to a dream of countless doors. Perhaps in a way it was a talisman for the things that were happening, for the season was Christmas, 1942, and Max was my Christmas present. So from this time on, she calls him my Max. And so at the same time, I think this is painted about the time she meets him. This is also 1942. This is her children's games. A really fantastical, dreamlike scene, including her little girls, which she often includes in this period's paintings, dressed in old-fashioned dresses. And I like this quote, which she at the time thought that this was really expressing sublime testimonials of my conviction that life is a desperate confrontation with unknown forces, while others were reading it as cute, girlish dreams flaring with sexual symbols. So she's always quite self-deprecating, or often is amused by what other people think of her art. So here are these young girls tearing and ripping at the wallpaper to reveal these hidden worlds underneath. So and then there's these feet of some other girl lying down. So very, very meant to be very evocative, enigmatic, ambiguous, and a bit frightening. So I want to consider for a moment the commitment to her life with Ernst. Remember that Max Ernst, at the time of the meeting with her, had just left his old love, Leonora Carrington, who had rejected his efforts to rekindle their passionate romance back in Europe. So he was intently looking around. He was not happy, of course, in his marriage of convenience to Peggy Guggenheim. As Tanning actually admitted many, many years later to an interviewer from the New Yorker, she said, "If it hadn't been me, it would have been another pretty girl." And she writes very, very nicely about the dilemma of being pretty as a woman trying to be ambitious and intelligent. And if you read her biography, you'll see that, autobiography, you'll see that. As for Tanning, she felt that he was the one she had been waiting for. And like Leonora Carrington back in the 1930s, the 32-year-old Tanning was thrilled to be parachuted into this sophisticated environment with all the surrealists she had tried to meet in Paris in 1939. She was very ambitious and adored Max for the rest of her life. And I love these photos. She's often posed in these always puts her head up in this very dramatic way. So this is done by Irving Penn, the famous photographer who did all of those shots in Vogue magazine. She's described later on by her relatives as always being very interested in dressing stylishly. And you can see that even in the videos of her later in life. In 1943, Waiting for Ernst's divorce from Peggy Guggenheim to be finalized, they moved to the wilds of Arizona, to Sedona, which at that time, not like it is today, was not much more than a frontier village. They built together a small house, which at first had no electricity. They had to carry water up from a stream, but a landscape that she described as a wild fantasy. They spent the next few years driving back and forth between Arizona and New York for exhibitions and a hit of culture. They both had studios where they painted some of their best known works. Because of their sophisticated friends' curiosity about this wilderness to which they have traveled, they received countless visitors, some appalled at their primitive conditions and primitive accommodations, others bemused. And to me, the idea of Marcel Duchamp coming to Sedona, Arizona in 1943 just amuses me no end. Lee Miller, the photographer we talked about last week, was one such visitor. And I think her photograph here of the couple tells you everything you need to know about the Tanning-Ernst relationship. As long as he allowed her to paint, she was more than happy to take care of all his creature comforts for the rest of his life. For example, when they lived in France, she actually oversaw the building of a big house. She did all of the interactions with the workers and the plumbers and made all of the sketches, while Ernst had nothing to do with it. He just continued to paint away in his studio. I think that says a lot about their relationship. Still, Dorothea holds her own. She adored Ernst and the world they created together. Ernst supported her art and was as frustrated as she was that he garnered all the attention while it took effort for her to gain any. She described herself as having nerves of steel, and she hated the word influence. She wrote, "When I hooked up with Max Ernst, he was clearly the only person I needed. And I assure you, we never talked art. Never. We had a lot of fun and talked about all kinds of things and showed each other new work rather formally with serious but brief comments, but we didn't talk about craft." In Sedona, I think she painted this work, one of her best known works. I've not really been able to establish where exactly she painted this, but it was in 1943. This is her Eine kleine Nachtmusik. And we see this very menacing image of young girls, again in old-fashioned dress, confined in an eerie corridor. This does not seem to be a house. This seems to be like a hotel or some kind of public space in a way, or semi-public at night. One girl with her hair upraised as if possessed by a demonic spirit stares down at a large sunflower, a plant Tanning considered the most aggressive of flowers, and it appears in many of her works at this time. But I think of it as a very Midwestern image as well, to include or symbol, to include the sunflower. She wrote about this painting, "It's about confrontation. Everyone believes he or she is his or her drama. While they don't always have giant sunflowers to contend with, there are always stairways, hallways, even very private theaters where the suffocations and the finalities are being played out, and the blood-red carpet or cruel yellows, the attacker, the delighted victim." So she's trying to evoke this very spooky idea of nighttime and children, and this door that's somewhat open is the part that really spooks me. So, as Whitney Chadwick says, it's both fecundity and menace, and that it's at night. It's very scary in a way. In an interview later in her long life, she said of these early works that they were somewhat naive and following surrealism as a fashionable style. But to quote her, pugnacious as she always was, I've always been drawn towards esoteric phenomena, the illogical, the inexpressible, the impossible. Anything that is ordinary and frequent is uninteresting to me. So I have to go in a solitary and risky direction. If it strikes you as being enigmatic, well, I suppose that's what I wanted it to do. In other paintings, such as this one, Endgame, I think her symbols are a little more obvious. She reveals her frustration with conventional bourgeois morality by co-opting the surrealist's favorite game of chess to portray herself as the queen in the form of a satin shoe, literally crushing the bishop. Is that meant to be the Pope of surrealism? At the bottom of the canvas is a trompe l'oeil scene of Arizona. In Sedona, she also painted two very intriguing and personally significant paintings. First is one of her only portraits, that is Max in a blue boat, and most poignantly, her maternity, which to me seems to signify a moment when she may have pondered the idea of having children. She said later on that it would have ruined her life or their lives. For at the same time, Ernst wrote a poem called Maternité, which delicately but firmly established, to my mind, his appalled opinion of that idea. And this painting, I think, is her response. We see an exhausted looking woman in a tattered nightie, especially torn up around the middle, with an unhappy looking baby in a bleak desert landscape. The figure has obviously just stepped through one door and is contemplating another door through which some objects seem to be billowing sails. I'm not sure what that object is meant to be. The figure has obviously, it's certainly not an idealized scene of mother and child. And then there's that little dog with a baby face. Tanning always had Lhasa Apso dogs, and they appear to me to be in her paintings almost like her alter ego, like we saw in Carrington with her white horses. We see the dog often, and they did have a very beloved dog at this time named Kachina. We see it in one of her last truly surrealist style paintings. This is Interior with Sudden Joy from 1951. And there's the dog. And again, these rather oddly old-fashioned dress, young girls, and then some biomorphic form appearing as well, called Interior with Sudden Joy. I guess this is the Sudden Joy. And there's this figure back here that really reminds me of Remedios Varo in some way. By this time, she and Ernst had married. They married in 1946 in a double ceremony in Hollywood with Man Ray. And then they had returned to France, if not yet permanently. By 1954, she and Ernst were going back and forth between France and Sedona, and Max had become an American citizen, only to have it revoked by, and I'm quoting Tanning here, his citizenship was revoked by the McCarran-Walter Act, a ghoulish piece of legislation, that's what she called it, enacted by the American Congress during the McCarthy era, directed against foreign-born Americans. I had never heard of that one. Again, it's predictable, but I had never heard of that. Anyway, so they took away his American citizenship. He essentially has no citizenship because he's already been stripped of his German citizenship. These are two paintings that she's doing, again, with her dogs at the time. This is 1954, so they're still in Sedona. But you can see here that the images are starting to change in tone and style. The family portrait, in which you see this looming figure of the father, she said was more generally a comment on the hierarchy within the sacrosanct family, while admitting that her Swedish father was a very authoritarian man. And the other painting depicts her beloved dog Kachina in what she thought was an amusing depiction of the dog's importance to her. Now, by 1957, when there was no hope of Max getting back his American citizenship, they moved to France permanently, where Tanning and Ernst lived until his death in 1976. Dorothea returned to the U.S. in 1980 to New York, where she lived until her death at 101 in 2012. In her autobiography, Tanning describes why and how, in about 1955, she left Surrealism and eventually painting altogether. And this I'm going to read in detail from her autobiography, Between Lives. After the initial delight of realizing what I could do with paint and brushes, after the heady whirl of acquiring surrealist friends, after seeing that I could transfer my inmost desires and enigmas to pictures that could be read like books, after contemplating hundreds of surrealist works, I began to wonder at certain similarities of conception in those paintings and drawings. I began to chafe just a little at the reliance on precisely painted elements of the natural world in order to present an incongruity. Her description then of what painters like Dali were doing. And she goes on, the peerless Dali, for instance, wasn't he a later Maxfield Parrish, but with a different imagination? So Maxfield Parrish, of course, was a popular illustrative painter who was very popular at the time. And what she's saying is that his technique is the same as Maxfield Parrish's, Dali's is. It's just producing these different spooky kind of, and predictably spooky kinds of images. It struck me that with some of these artists, everything was collage. Gradually, in looking at how many ways paint can flow onto canvas, I began to long for letting it have more freedom. End of quote. So the paintings she did at this time were all about color, and were referred to as prismatic, almost but not quite abstract. So this looks like she's moving toward abstraction, but there are faces and there are figures here. And in this painting, she said, I wanted to lead the eye into spaces that hid, revealed, transformed all at once, and where there would be some never before seen image, as if it had appeared with no help from me. I was very excited and called it Insomnias. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't put it on there. This is the wrong one. Anyway, Insomnias looks a lot like this one. What did I do with that? Oh, there it is. Okay, there's Insomnias. Sorry about that. And these are figures that she started to produce later. She continued to evolve in a more corporeal style, as in the one on the right, referencing in an ambiguous way female bodies. So she is really known as the expert on different aspects of painting the female body. Then in the late 1960s, as she says on that video that I hope some of you have watched, she grew weary of turpentine and canvas and turned to fabric and thread to further explore female sexuality. And it's wonderful to see her with that old Singer sewing machine making these extraordinarily anatomical figures that are all looped over each other. This is one of the first fabric sculptures she did on Trente. And she wrote about this. Oh, okay, there's an example of how I can't see what I wrote. I found that being obsessed with the durability durability of the work doesn't appeal to me. I am often told, what a pity the sculptures aren't more solid. They might as well say dead or paralyzed. No, I'm sorry for them that it should have happened that way, but it did. When you fall in love, you don't ask the beloved, how long are you going to live? Which is an interesting thing to say about your art. Her experiments with these fabric sculptures grew in size and ambition, culminating in the astonishing installation Hôtel du Pavot, Chambre 202, which she referred to as the surrealist work par excellence, and probably the last, she says with a question mark. Cloth figures leap out of or are perhaps sucked in to a dreary hotel room. Inside the room, there are further installations. An armchair and a female form merge into an embrace, while another figure reclines over a table in what may be pleasure or pain. Tanning said the individual parts of the work are stand-ins for our human dilemma, having traded their eroticism for despair. She also said in an interview that she believed the work to be directly related to a song that was popular in her childhood. And that song starts, in room 202, the walls keep talking to you. I'll never tell you what they said, so turn out the light and come to bed. The song laments the fate of Kitty Kane, one-time Chicago gangster's wife, who poisoned herself in room 202 of a local hotel. So she was by this time having, she is well known and she's having exhibitions and some kinds of surveys, especially in Europe, still because they're still living in Europe. But in 1975, Max Ernst had a huge retrospective exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. He was 84 years old when they both traveled to the US for the opening. Tanning later wrote about the frustrations attending these events, in which she was rarely mentioned as anything but Ernst's wife, if even that. And it's true that in all the laudatory reviews of this exhibition that I read, she is rarely named and never acknowledged as an artist in her own right. It's fascinating to me, though, that this image was done by Andy Warhol. The photograph was made by Andy Warhol. This must have been their last trip together, since in that year Ernst suffered a stroke and was bedridden and miserable until he died on April 1st, 1976. Tanning writes exquisitely about this time, first with insightful ruminations about the plight of two artists living together, and then most eloquently about grief. Eventually, after a few years of mourning and indecision, she moved back to New York. While she did continue to paint and make sculptures, increasingly she turned to writing. First, her autobiography, which was called Birthday, which was then expanded into the book that I've read, the Between Lives, and then books of poetry. She also began to have more recognition in America with exhibitions and publications, much to her satisfaction. One of her last series of paintings, done in 1998, depicted flowers accompanied by her poems, probably the tamest painting she ever completed. And notice in this picture, she has kept that picture of Kachina that she painted in 1954. Until the end, she remained prickly on the topic of being only a woman artist or Max Ernst's wife. I found two articles about her in the New Yorker in the 2000s to be very telling. In Jane Kramer's 2004 New Yorker article, she quotes Tanning, quote, "I wanted to make the most surrealist paintings I could, and I did, and now I've had 50 more years of painting." So, that stopped in the 50s, and she's talking about she's gone on to other things, and nobody ever talks about that. Tanning is still so sensitive to the prejudices, this is Kramer writing, Real and imagined, she suffered as, quote, a pretty girl who also painted, that she keeps a folder marked sass, etc., including all of the times that she's made some sassy comment to people who talk about her that way. One critic calls her poetry from this time evidence of an absolutely uncensored imagination, the wide-eyed voice of a ferocious fanged wisdom. But still, in this 2004 interview, she still condemned feminism as disgusting and had very strong opinions about what a great man Ernst was. But by 2011, in a New Yorker profile article just before she died, um, this article has a very different tone. The author of the profile, a man, writes, and I find this great. Ernst's work has always been overvalued. Philip Fisher once called him the very appropriately named Max Ernst, meaning maximum earnestness. While Tanning, by far the more protean and surprising artist, might never get her full due. As Jane Kramer pointed out, I'm still quoting here, out in a 2004 profile, Tanning owned, in all senses of that word, the female figure. It is hard to think of another woman artist who made more of women's bodies. Some of the women in her work look rather dumbfounded, as though they'd expected to sit for an ordinary portrait and ended up in some surrealist nightmare. Their deadpan looks to ironize their surroundings. What a weird state of affairs it is that men have been entrusted to control the terms that define the depiction of women. What a sham! Later, she freed her women up, unfroze them. They dance and throng and embrace like sexy, slightly bob-like putti, sick of peering from the sidelines all these years. End quote. So there we have it. Two feisty, imaginative women who finally gained a modicum of the recognition they deserved. And so there I am. Okay. So I'll stop sharing the screen. So now we still have some time, I think. Yes. So if we want to talk about, if you have any questions first on that, okay, Rick?
Yeah, on that very quote that you just read to us, it sounds like the author had seen a lot more paintings than you've shown us here, particularly about women. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, these were nothing of what she produced.
Do
You
you
didn't find enough female bodies in those?
did you do you have an idea of the volume she produced over her lifetime?
Um, I don't know, but the interesting thing is that Dorothea Tanning Foundation website includes all of her images from the very beginning on. It's got to be thousands at least, I would think. Yeah? Does anybody know? Don't have any idea. Okay, any more questions specifically about this lecture? Okay, well, let's open it up now to think about some of those and discuss the questions about the whole class. So, Dolores, do you want to join me? Remember, we had some questions that we had put to you. Are you there, Dolores?
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now?
Uh-huh.
I would like to go back to the introductory email, which asks what differences you see between male and female surrealists.
You have to unmute if you want to. Hi, Prue. Or do you even think these women were surrealists? There's another part of the question. And why would they be linked with? Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question, particularly when you're talking about Frida Kahlo as well. And you were identifying what was surrealist about her work. I found that fascinating because I think that's really debatable.
Mm-hmm. I had never thought of Frida as a surrealist.
Me neither.
Being part of that. Period.
Me neither. But I could see the case for it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was a long bow. But in terms of the differences between male and female surrealism, I don't think necessarily you could chance upon one of these paintings not knowing who painted it and guess. Not necessarily, no.
Okay. Do others think that too? Okay. I suppose we have to kind of define what we mean by a surrealist painting.
I would agree with it, actually, because, well, first of all, to me, it seems the women went very deep into their subconscious or whatever, they weren't really far. But then I'm not sure about the men. I don't know enough about their work to compare it. So, yeah.
I think that the women are much more into, they took that whole philosophical, statement of Breton and said, okay, buddy, you think that we're just muses and women child, and we're going to show you, what women's innermost, what their dreams lead to, and this idea of women's power, in Leonora Carrington's and Remedios Varo and others, which lead us to that question about their seeing themselves as witches, or sorceresses, or evoking dream worlds, where I think the men are much more interested in this kind of intense, unsettling, almost violent idea of dream worlds, and a kind of sexual frustration is there in like the films in L'Âge d'Or and Chien Andalou. To me, those are all about androgyny, but also sexual frustration.
I did find the woman being eaten. It was Meret Oppenheim, and it's called Spring Feast. And for men and women, it's like you probably wouldn't see a man putting himself on a table
and
addressed that way being eaten, but the woman did put herself on the table like that.
Yes. As a comment on the way that women are objectified or, connected with.
Right.
I think there's a lot of difference, but.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, for example, I don't know why, I really can't explain why, but when I saw the fur cup for the first time, I said that had to have been done by a woman. I don't know why, but psychologically, it just seems that way to me. The men are much more, what's the word I want? Well, I really, really find Dali just horrible. I think for a couple of his early things, okay, fine. And the film I think is interesting, but I find them just icky. But that's not a very, very
don't the women portray themselves and their searches in a much more in-depth way? And I don't know, the word luscious came to mind, even
right.
Luscious.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why that came to mind, but there's something about the forms that they use often that seems different than the male surrealists.
Okay.
And I think there's a big difference. I agree with you.
Yeah. This will sound funny, but my feeling now, looking at a lot of male surrealism, is that I think these guys today would be incels. They say they love women, but they want
No,
them
they
to
don't.
be, yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, they don't.
They're afraid of
They
them.
want, yeah.
Yes.
They're fascinated by women, but they're afraid of them, I
They
think.
portray them as children.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They like
yeah,
them as a child muse.
yeah, yeah, over which they have control. Go ahead,
Power.
Rick.
Yes.
On the comment about it being luscious, that brought up a sense that I had of the male painters having more space and in fewer objects, whereas
Oh, that's a good point.
the women had the frame was more densely packed with images
Oh, that's
rather than
interesting.
space.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
The one thing that I keep coming back to is that the male artists, I'm sorry if I'm broad brushing, but they seem more to be interested in prodding or provoking debate, intellectual debate, where I feel several of you have said it, that the women are more serious, but I think in some ways a deeply intuitive way, going into the mind and pulling from, the depths of the mind as a as opposed to, sort of intellectualizing the world around them.
The women are more into mythology and magic and
more playful,
alchemical, more playful. Yeah.
And even more the notion of what creativity is, perhaps by virtue of their own creativity, female creativity.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and the men are, because of Breton, at least in that direction, is so deadly serious all the time,
right. Yeah.
And boringly so.
Yeah. It's always the intellectualizing as opposed to real creativity.
Yeah. Now, Dolores, you also wanted to ask about who were people's favorites.
Yeah.
Right?
Leonora.
I first wanted
You like Leonora? And why?
Because I think, again, she was the most playful. I loved some of those images. They were really fun. I liked her.
Yes. Yeah.
So I liked Lee Miller, the movie, the photographer. That that was very intense.
And Dolores, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that I find this was really a very stimulating class for me to be involved with. And I loved co-giving it with Erica. It was fascinating.
It was interesting for us to work together. Yeah.
What is staying with me is that it's so relevant to situations we're in now. So if you think of the surrealist stated aim to get away from some of the limitations of logical Western culture and to embrace the childlike and the primitive and the playful, well, I think the women actually did that better than the men. But I'm also thinking of the terrible forces that they were contending with, that they were trying to be these gentle, playful spirits in the middle of the fascist growth of power. Whereas the women who are today even emphasizing playfulness and sharing and nurturing, is this going to survive the current power structures? I just really wonder about that.
Surrealism is really very much that product of the 20th century and all of its horrors. Yeah. And like Leonora Carrington and all of them had to go through, just reminds us of what happens with war and displacement. And the women, I think, persevered in a way that was. It also, to me, doing the Dorothea Tanning one was interesting because she was the only American of this bunch and was far less tainted by any of this horror. Whereas all the other women had to deal with the complete destruction of a European way of life. I just found it interesting that she was gutsy in a different way because of that, I think, and were we too harsh on Max Ernst?
He loved everybody. Max. Whew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kathy?
Yeah, I don't think that one could ever be too harsh on Max Ernst. I mean, he deserves
Apparently
it.
they were.
The thing is, when I read Dorothea Tanning's one, I know artist couples like that. She took care of all of his social life, his organized everything so that he, the great man, could just paint. And he was in this other, I mean, but he was a kind, good man, apparently.
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
do they do that?
What?
Why do they do that?
Who, the man or the women?
Either.
Yeah. Why do they do that?
Yes, why?
Who, the men or the women?
Women.
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, she came from nothing, right? And here through him, she becomes part of this group that she wants, she has this cultivated,
It's her
sophisticated
access.
life,
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's caretaking is good as a role. It's just to the extreme that's the problem. I wish men would do more caretaking. We'd be a nicer world.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the course also made me really curious about the non-artist in the group, Peggy Guggenheim. And I'm a little curious about her.
Did you read about her?
I want to.
Oh, did you read about her? She bragged all the time that she slept with 3,000 men. So,
ouch.
And she had clout. She had power because she had money.
Yeah.
And so,
What was the age difference between Ernst and Dorothea? What was the age difference?
She was 32 and he was 54.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Oh.
And I just love the way she writes about it. She writes about it very, very well, very insightfully in the end of her autobiography about, okay, yeah, I know this was what the situation was, but it was worth it to me, is more or less what she's saying. And he was really impossible once he has this stroke and he's in bed and he doesn't want to talk about the past. He won't see any of his friends. He's just furious, until he dies. So anyway, but the idea of them in Sedona, Arizona in the 1940s is, to me, just hilarious in a way, and really living primitively, and then all of these cultivated Europeans swan in and go, oh my goodness, they don't even have a bathroom. It's just funny.
It was very interesting to read all the behind the scenes stories, though. That is a good thing that you do.
Oh, good. And Dolores, who was your favorite?
Well, I really enjoy very much your two Mexican ladies, Remedios and Leonor Carrington.
Yeah, they're my favorites.
I guess we can't call them Mexican, living in Mexico.
Yeah.
And then I'm very fond of Maya Deren. The more I know about her and see her films, the more I'm really impressed. And her commitment to, I mean, she's practically killing herself, not being able to have a proper diet. These artists really have very little financial support once they get going. So if you think of what they contribute to culture and the support they get, which is pathetic, they're really very heroic, this group.
Did anybody watch the movie Lee?
Yes, I did.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I thought that was good.
We have to remember these artists and this time, they really did believe that art could change the world. I knew a famous photographer named Ilse Bing. Have any of you ever? Okay, she was the lady with the Leica in the 1930s in Paris. And she too, she was Jewish, had escaped, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, she lived to 100 as well. And she was rediscovered when I was working in New Orleans, and the curator of photography there rediscovered her. And so she was from Hessen, where I had just lived. And so we just had a real rapport. And she talked about that until the dropping of the nuclear bomb, she felt that that was the end of the idea that the world, that art could change the world. And to her, that meant the end of culture. We could still continue to try, but that, and I thought that was an interesting insight to that we've all just been living in this world in which that anxiety hangs over us all the time. And so we don't have the ability to be free in that way, to just think, well, I can live on nothing, and as long as I'm producing art, I'm creating something for eternity, you know. Anyway, that's my spiel.
True. Yeah.
Okay, guys. Thanks for being here. Prue.
Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful course, both of you. Thank you so much.
Yes, this was
Very
really great.
interesting.
Marvelous.
Oh,
Meg,
Dolores.
Meg, thank you for making everything happen.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Yes.
We appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.